Hey guys, it's Jeremy again. We're going to do another lap guide video, and today we're at the legendary Circuit de la Sarthe, better known as Le Mans. We're driving the Chevrolet Corvette Z06 GT3R per usual, and we're running a setup that began its life as a high-mo setup. I've made a few small changes to better suit my driving style, but nothing too crazy, so shout out to high-mo setups, they did a really good job on this one. Weather and track conditions are the same as what we're going to be working with come race day, and we're able to put together a 3-minute 52.026, which is a pretty quick lap around here, all things considered. You'll see I made a couple mistakes along the way, but we'll cover those when we get to them. I'm going to try my best not to screw this up, because this is a big one. Now, there are racetracks, and then there is Le Mans. For more than a century, the Circuit de la Sarthe has stood as one of the most legendary proving grounds in all of motorsport. Since the first 24 hours of Le Mans in 1923, these roads have tested the limits of race cars, manufacturers, and some of the greatest drivers the world has ever known. Some of the biggest names in motorsport have come here chasing the same thing, victory at Le Mans, and the chance to etch their name into racing history forever. Despite more than 100 years of evolution, the challenge of this place remains unmistakable. Nearly 8.5 miles of flat-out straights, massive braking zones, technical chicanes, and some of the fastest corners in all of racing. From the Dunlop Curve in Tertre Rouge, down the legendary Mulsanne Straight, through Indianapolis and Arnage, and finally into the Porsche, Karting, and Corvette Curves. Through the Forza Chicane, every section of this circuit demands something different from both the car and the driver. This isn't simply another racetrack. It's more than a century of motorsport history compressed into a single lap. Today, we're going to break down exactly what it takes to put that lap together. Welcome to Le Mans. We're going to run this lap guide the same way we've done our guides in the past. I'm going to run the lap at speed, and then we'll break down the lap, point out some of the key areas that you're going to want to focus on, some of the off tracks and slowdowns that you're definitely going to want to avoid around here. Apologies in advance if the baby wakes up and starts fussing, or if the lullabies bleed through too much. I'm doing my best to keep him asleep so I can get this lap guide knocked out. So without further ado, let's get it. and across the line. So as you can see, we're able to pull off that 3-minute 52.026. It's a really quick lap around here. Le Mans is the fastest street circuit in the world. They have slowed it down a bit over the years. In 1990, they introduced those chicanes on the Mulsanne Straight. Prior to that, some of the prototypes around here were hitting upwards of 250 miles an hour down the Mulsanne Straight, which is bonkers when you think about it. Even with low downforce, our GT3s are hard-pressed to get anywhere near that, especially with the chicanes. That being said, speed is still the name of the game around Le Mans. Making sure you can maximize your runs onto the long straightaways that this track has to offer is very, very important. That being said, there are slowdowns and off-tracks waiting for you outside and inside almost every single corner leading onto the straights around here, so you need to be very cautious. It is important to maximize your runs, but it is more important to avoid those off-tracks and those slowdowns. Getting our lap started, like we always say, the start of a good lap begins with a good exit out of the final corner. The Forza Chicane is pretty straightforward, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But the exit is just making sure you get the power down nice and smooth, being ready to catch the car if you do induce any wheel spin, and keeping that momentum going forward. Working our way down the straightaway, I tend to just let the car float in the middle of the road here. You can walk it to the right or the left. I try and avoid walking to the right too far, too early on, just because it'll compromise your entry into the Dunlop Curve. You want to err to the left, if anything, here. But I found you don't gain too much by making a big swoop into the corner. You do tend to open yourself up to a car sticking its nose on the inside, though, so just be mindful of that. As we make our way into the Dunlop Curve, we're looking for this first white painted line here on the right-hand side, and that's where I'm setting up my braking zone for the Dunlop Chicane. Keeping the car down the left-hand side of the road, we're hard on the brakes, down into second gear, and you'll see I start working the car to the left pretty early on here. I found that you can chop off almost this entire, you can chop off this entire apex on the left here without getting an off track or a slowdown. As long as you don't dip your wheels into the gravel, you're all right. I found that times I have skipped into the gravel and gotten a little too greedy with it, I've picked up an off track and a slowdown before I even had a chance to on the exit of this chicane. So there's some time to be gained here, but just be mindful that you can be bitten if you get too greedy with it. The same cannot be said about this next apex. You can't chop as much of it off. I try and keep my left side tires on the track, at least, if not just pull them a little bit onto this curbing here. But if you get too greedy with this apex, you will get an off track for sure. Sometimes I've picked up a slowdown through there. I haven't quite found the limit on that one, but they're pretty much everywhere around here. There's another one waiting for you out here if you run too wide. We're hard on the throttle, making sure we get a good run down through the forest Esses, but we want to make sure the car doesn't run too far out to the left here. You can drag your right side tires onto this curbing just barely, but if they go too far onto the curbing or if they break too much of that dimension that the white line has crossed, you will get an off track. You will get a slowdown if you go much further than that, so just be careful. And then powering through the forest Esses is pretty straightforward. We're just following the path of least resistance here. Letting the car straighten up right towards this apex here on the right hand side and just working our way downhill. I'm tempted to grab fifth at this point, but we have a very short distance before we're going to be getting on the brakes to set up this left-hander, and so I just hold fourth. I found that it just keeps the car a little bit more stable. It's less gears to change down through, less shock going through the entire machine itself. Down into third once we get our trail braking engaged, and we're just working the car around the left-hand side, making sure we don't hit this curb too much if we can avoid it. I found it pushes us out to the right too early in this complex, and it really compromises our ability to work the car back around this next curb that we're coming up to. I try and attack this curb on the right hand side, but only near the end of it. I found if I get onto it too early, the car will become unsettled very early on, and you'll have a very abrupt meeting with this wall on the outside. The car bottoms out pretty quickly as soon as you get up over this curb, and without the wheels touching the ground, there isn't too much hope you have, right? Now that's very much so specifically to the Corvette. I haven't tried any of the other cars through here. Some of them might be better than others regarding attacking this curb itself, but just be careful and cautious coming through here because the road does fall away past this curb, and it makes it even more difficult to catch it if the car does start to slide. I let the car walk out to the left here, just maximizing its ability to use all the road and not scrub off any of this speed. And now we're setting up our entry into one of the most important corners of this circuit, Tertre Rouge. I use this light box here on the left-hand side as my braking marker. I say braking marker, but we really just dab the brakes. The goal is to just get the weight on the front tires so that we can toss the car into the corner. And then we want to be able to power through as early as possible and get a nice good run down that first section of the Mulsanne straight. You can see I get on the brakes, but it's only really up to about 50% or so, and then we're right back off it. And then hard on the throttle as soon as we clear the apex point and we haven't gotten bounced around too much by those little sausage curbs on the inside. You can cut quite a bit of this apex off, but I always just try and keep my left side tires on the track. I found that if you can keep two wheels over the white line and not drag them onto the curb too far, you're pretty safe. On exit here, there's another off track and a slowdown waiting for you. If you run too far wide here, I found that this grate that is kind of just cutting the steering wheel in half is the limit. Don't quote me on that. I've gotten close to it and I haven't gotten an off track or a slowdown. I've gotten a little bit closer to it and I've gotten an off track and a slowdown. So you're kind of flirting with disaster. I try and keep my right side tires on the right side of this white line if I can. I'll drag them onto this curb a little bit if I absolutely have to. I'm just trying to maximize the speed that I can carry down this first section of the Mulsanne. And then it's pretty straightforward through here. I keep the car down the right-hand side of the road at first. You'll notice the KFC on the right-hand side. Wait, hold on. Hold on. So, sorry, I thought I saw a brown Aston Martin parked in the KFC parking lot. Disregard that. Okay. So as we're working our way down the rest of the Mulsanne, I try and ride this crown that's in the middle of the road here. It helps minimize the aero profile underneath the car, and every little bit helps as far as maximizing your straight line speed around here. Setting up our braking for the Forza Chicane. I have a terrible braking marker for the Forza Chicane. I don't know why my brain chose this braking marker, but it did, and I'm stuck with it. This shadow right here that's been created by a lovely little tree off to our left, that is the braking marker that my brain has chosen for the Forza Chicane. It's about 25 to 30 meters before the 100-meter board. So call it 120-meter shadow. Nah. It's not a good braking reference point to use because in overcast or rainy conditions, it's gone. At night, it's gone. So it's kind of scary going into the Forza Chicane at 284 kph, not knowing when you're going to brake. So about the 120-meter board, I can brake at the 100, but I found going in there too ballistic doesn't really gain me too much time. My goal is to maximize my ability to get a good exit out of the Forza Chicane and start that run down the second half of the Mulsanne straight. So we hit that magic little shadow there, and we're hard on the brakes down the left-hand side of the road. We start feeding the car into the right just as we clear that cone. And I found you can straddle these curbs at both of these chicanes without getting an off track or a slowdown, as long as you don't take too much of it. If you get your left side tires too close to the curb during the right-handers, or your right side tires too close to the curb during the left-handers, you're liable to get bit with a slowdown or an off track, so just be cautious through here, but there's a little bit of time to be gained if you can get it up on the curbs. Down into second to loop it around this left-hander, and then as soon as I can get the car rotated, we're hard on the throttle, just so we can maximize our run down this second section. And then again, pretty straightforward. You'll see we're just keeping the car in the middle of the road. We're trying to ride this crown as best we can. The Corvette walks all over the place on me. I'm constantly fighting this thing. But again, we're trying to just minimize that aero profile underneath the car. Obviously, if there's a car in front of you, you don't need to just ride the crown. Follow the car in front of you and get that sweet, sweet draft. Setting up our entrance into the Michelin Chicane, we're looking for this 100-meter board here on the right-hand side. Hard on the brakes. Once we get to this cone, I'll start feeding the car over to the left. And my goal is to attack this curb. You don't want to attack it too early because you'll get a slowdown or an off track if you get your right side tires too close to it or up on it. But I found jumping it a little bit really helps open up the right-hander. and our exit for the Michelin Chicane. You just need to be mindful that because you're about to hit this curb, the car will become unsettled. You'll see I kind of bleed off the brakes a little bit there more aggressively, just in anticipation of hitting this curb. I try and unload the front suspension and give it some room to absorb that impact of the curb itself. It's tough for it to do when you've got this thing standing on its nose under braking for this chicane. Working the car back over to the right, you can see we get it up on the curb. I get really over eager with that throttle application. I probably should have gone to about 70 or 80% instead of just putting my foot up its butt, but what are you going to do? I bled the throttle out too late at this point, and I could already tell the wheels were going to start breaking loose on me, and so I just straightened the wheel up. There's a lot of track to play with out here. As long as you can keep the car relatively close and your right side tire is on the right side of this curbing that's coming at you, you're not going to pick up an off track or a slowdown. So I just let the car walk out here and use as much track as possible. A little bit of steering lock to get it pointed back in the right direction. And then we're headed down the rest of the Mulsanne straight. Through the Mulsanne kink. Making our way down towards the Mulsanne Curve. This is an interesting corner because we have a dogleg approach to it. You want to do your braking in as straight a line as possible, which is difficult when your entry to the corner is a turn. This little cone that you can barely make out here down at the very end, it's set up on the outside corner of, it's kind of like across the apex at the entry of the corner. That's what we're aiming at. I try and get the car pointed at that cone before I start my braking. And then we're hard on the brakes, and we're just kind of guiding the car a little bit further to the right. The goal is to get this cone to just kind of slide by the left-hand side of the car. As soon as we clear the cone, we start feeding the car in here. You can chop quite a bit of this apex off without picking up a slowdown or an off track, but you do want to keep your left side tires on the track to avoid getting bitten by it. Coming out of the corner, you can use all of this road available without picking up a slowdown or an off track. You can even dip your tires off into the gravel if you absolutely have to. That being said, the gravel will slow the car down itself without giving you a slowdown, so you want to avoid that if you can. It is there as a safety net if you need to use it. We're really aggressive with our throttle application here, just because this is another really long straight section. It's longer than that final section of the Mulsanne that we just ran down, and so you can see we're already feeding the throttle in at this point, and we're still a decent ways away from the apex. Again, we're just trying to push the car around the corner with the throttle and make the rear end work for us. And then we set up our run down towards the legendary Indianapolis complex. Pretty straightforward. I tend to keep the car down the right-hand side of the road past these curbs. You don't want to hit the front face of these curbs if you can avoid it, just because it's a pretty aggressive lip on that front face, and it'll slow the car down just because of how much of a bump you are hitting. Not a terrible amount, but every little bit counts down these straights. Setting up the right-hander into Indianapolis, you can use this green bit of concrete on the left-hand side, but you don't want to use too much of it. I found if you cheat too far to the left here, you will get bit with a little off-track, and it is one of the silliest off-tracks you can pick up around here. Of all the turns you're trying to carry a massive amount of speed through, this one isn't the most crucial, and going a foot further to the left is not going to gain you all that much on your entry. So picking up the off-track is just kind of funny. I lift coming through the right-hander. I found the car can take it flat no problem, once the tires are warm, that is. But it causes some difficulties when you try and get it slowed down for Indianapolis itself. So I found lifting helps settle the car a little bit better before you do stomp on the brakes. We get the car down the right-hand side of the road. The goal is to get down into second. I turn in a little earlier than I'd like to have. And my attempt to fix this, I just kind of start kicking at the throttle. The goal is to induce a little bit of oversteer and start seesawing the rear end a little bit and making it more active, as it were, to try and push the nose onto a tighter trajectory around the corner. It worked a little too well because I picked up just a tiny bit of oversteer on exit, but not a terrible amount. We're still able to keep the car rolling the same direction we wanted it to. and we make our run down towards Arnage. I'm tempted to go up into 4th at this point, but I found if I do, I usually run too deep into the braking zone and I'll miss my apex, and you really don't want to go too deep into the braking zone for Arnage, just because you're setting up your run into the Porsche Curves, and that's such a momentum section that you don't want to be second guessing yourself on how much speed you're carrying in or if you should brake later or anything else, because it's usually going to end up biting you. Hard on the brakes down the left-hand side. I worked the car down into 1st. Again, I turned in a little too early. I was getting way too eager at this point because my delta was pretty green. We get up on the curb here, and as soon as we hit this curb, I can tell that the car hates me for what I just did to it. So we start opening up the steering to catch it, and it helps keep the car's angle still tracking in a direction that's conducive towards our lap time. Right? It isn't so much a lateral slide. We're keeping our momentum going in a relatively straight line. It's more cocked to the left than what we'd like, but it isn't the worst. It's minimizing that mistake. You want to get a good exit out of Arnage if you can. Nice, smooth throttle application. You don't have to launch your car over the curb and stomp your foot down like a monkey like I did, but it worked this time. We make our way down towards the Porsche Curves. I keep the car down the left-hand side of the road for the most part here. I'll let it walk towards the middle a little bit once we get through this first left, just so that we don't chop off too much or have to put too much steering angle in to make our approach to the left here. Setting up our entry into the Porsche Curves. The first section of the Porsche Curves is absolutely critical. If you miss this first Porsche curve, you will not really get any of the other corners that follow this right until the road straightens out after the Corvette curves. It is very difficult to get your rhythm back if you miss this first one. I use this green concrete on the left-hand side as a general reference point for when I'm going to be lifting or braking. It isn't a rule that's set in stone. It's something that's very much so a variable entry point based on your exit of Arnage. Which is why that corner is so critical. This is one of those kind of mind's eye complexes that you need to run through a couple times to really get your mind dialed in for how these corners come at you, because you are carrying so much speed through here, especially if you're running a low downforce setup. It's a handful at best. There's a white painted line you can see here in the middle of the road. It ends, and I try and get my arc into the first section of the Porsche Curves to cross over the tail end of that white line. And you can see right here we're approaching the ending of that white line here, and my arc cuts right across the end of it, and we're lined up with this curbing here on the right side, and we're hard back on the throttle. It was really just a little bit of braking at the beginning of the Porsche Curves to get the weight on the front of the car where we needed it to. And as soon as I could tell I got the rotation that I needed and the car loaded on that outside rear suspension, we put our foot right back up it. You need to let the car work through here. The aero is working, the suspension is working, the tires are working. This is what the car was made to do. You have to trust it to do it. Keep pushing. Sometimes it'll get a little squirrely, but this is where that limit gets approached. Still hard on the throttle. We work the car over to the right-hand side as far as we can before we toss it back over to the left. I try and avoid this curb on the left, but I end up hitting a little bit of it. This wall on the right side is notorious. It will bite you so hard. It looks like it's further away from you than it is, and then all of a sudden it comes rushing up at you. Hitting that curb on the left-hand side will tend to push your car out towards the right and towards this wall, which is why I try and avoid it as much as I do. I hit it a little bit, and you can see it creates the tiniest little baby lift here when I went, oh no, because I saw this wall coming at me much faster than I was hoping it would. We're able to get away with it, and we miss it by just a couple inches. It's one of those complexes where it's tempting to just run out and tap the wall lap after lap, but the little bit of aero damage that you'll pick up does add up. It's going to cost you down the Mulsanne. Not to mention, sometimes taking your mirror off is all that happens. Other times, your spotter is in your ear saying you've got wheel damage. Your race is almost over at that point, you know. So you need to be careful through here. You're going really quick, and so even a slight tap sends a lot of force through the vehicle. Keeping the car in fifth gear, letting the car just carry that momentum and roll its speed through. You see I'm off throttle, making sure that we're just settled and we're able to keep this arc that we've got going through back on the throttle for a little bit just to push the car over to the left to set up our toss into the karting corner. Down into fourth. And we keep it tight along this curbing here on the right-hand side. The goal is to set up an arc that kind of works even further out to the right as this right-hander ends, so that you can really get a good line across this left-hander. You can cut quite a bit of this apex. I found I try and avoid these sausage curves just because they unsettle the car a great deal. And as you're trying to catch the car being unsettled, you're walking closer and closer towards a waiting slowdown on the outside of the karting complex. You got to keep 2 tires on the track through here. I found that if my left side tires drag over this white painted line, that's a slowdown. It's a 1 second slowdown, which we've gone over. It's like a 5 second slowdown around here. It's absolutely brutal, especially right at the end of the lap. You just fought so hard to get here. Try and be careful coming out of the karting complex. We get really close to it there. We get away with it. And we set up our entry through the legendary Corvette Curves, named after one of the greatest race cars ever made. I have no idea why they put this billboard here, but I'm not in charge. These corners are pretty straightforward. It's a nice, smooth, easy chicane. The joke always was that there's only straight roads in America, so they couldn't give us any corners named after American cars that were that complex, right? Ha. Funny. Corvette goes on to spank everybody at Le Mans. Anyways, making our entry, we're almost done with the lap here, I promise. Making our entry into the Forza Chicane, it's an alright name, I guess. You'll see I use a little bit of the pit entry here to set up my entrance to the first bit of the Forza Chicane. This curb here is slanted to the right and the left. You'll see it's not quite the halfway point that divides it. I want to make sure that I stay to the left-hand side of this curb. I found if I come too far from the right, the car will launch off of that and use it more of a ramp than anything else. And you don't need to be hitting any sick jumps when you're setting up your braking zone for the final corner complex at Le Mans. Ramping the car up on the curb just the tiniest little bit, down into third. You can cut quite a bit of this apex and just as much of the next without getting a slowdown. I found if you get too greedy with them, though, you will get a slowdown, and that's one of the worst feelings ever because there isn't enough time to really bleed it off before your next lap starts. So you just killed both your qualifying laps if it happens at the end of your first, or 2 invalid laps and a massive slowdown mid-race. Again, the slowdowns around here are absolutely brutal. It is quicker to cut off some of these apexes, but if you get bit by that slowdown, it's never worth it. The time you'll gain over the course of the entire race, cutting off some of these apexes and making a few of these corners, will be lost if you get 2 slowdowns. That's it, 2 slowdowns, and every single good lap you have this race is null and void. So just keep that in mind. It is very critical to have as clean a lap as possible. Off tracks aren't the end of the world. Missing out on the bonus points is okay, but the slowdowns are absolutely going to kill you. We work our car down into second for the final bit of this Forza Chicane. This is where you do want to hit some sick jumps right at the end of the lap. Okay, I attack this curb on the left-hand side of the road. I try and roll as much speed as I can through here. I found that if I go too slowly over this curb, the wheels will kind of dip into this valley and they drag across these sausage curbs. It creates this weird load that goes through the rear suspension, and once the car finally settles over the end of these curbs, it has a tendency of snapping left or right. It really does not like what you just made it do. I haven't been able to figure out why just yet, so I've just stopped doing it. What I've taken to doing is just launching the car off this first curb and getting it to where the tires on the left-hand side don't touch the ground again until we're like rejoining the Earth's surface on the far side of this curb over here. If you go back through and check out the lap at speed, you'll kind of see the car kick up and you'll hear it land as we come down over the other side of that curb. The concept isn't as easy to convey in slow motion. We do get quite a big lift up there, and you can tell we've covered quite a bit of distance before the front of the car is coming back down. We want to get the car further to the left than this, and we were just barely able to do so because you want to avoid hitting this Mondo sausage curb that's on the inside here. It'll send you flying off into the gravel trap, and you'll be hanging out with Sean's French fries over here. We work around that sausage curb, and at this point my Delta was very green, and I had gotten no off tracks or slowdowns at this point, and I wasn't going to let it all slip away, so I put my foot right up it. We were able to catch it and not induce too much wheel spin, and then power on across the line. And that is it. A 3-minute 52-second lap around Le Mans in a Chevrolet Corvette. Like I said, this is one of those legendary circuits. Hopefully you guys are able to learn a thing or two from this lap guide. Hopefully I did this incredible track some justice. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel greatly, and I will catch you boys on the next one. Bye-bye.